There's a liquid that costs $2 to make at home. It takes gray, cracked, sun-destroyed wood back to the day it left the mill. Not with paint that hides the damage, and not with stain that fades in 6 months. It penetrates the grain itself and rebuilds the wood from the inside out. One coat on a rotting fence, and the neighbors think you replaced every board. One pass on a weathered deck, and the contractor you almost called loses a $1,000 job. Furniture that looked ready for the landfill suddenly looks like it belongs in a showroom. No sanding required, no power tools needed, no experience necessary. This formula existed before the Second World War. Craftsmen in the 1930s knew it by heart. Cabinet makers passed it down like a trade secret. Then the wood restoration industry figured out something devastating. If homeowners ever discovered this liquid, they would never call a contractor again. A $2 mixture that replaces a $900 service cannot be allowed to spread. So they buried it, not because it failed, but because it worked too well. This is the story of the liquid the wood industry prayed you would never find. Welcome to Forbidden Hacks. If these stories matter to you, hit subscribe and the bell. This is where we dig up what the industry buried. Let me take you back to where this formula was born. In 1860, a British inventor named Frederick Walton noticed something strange in his London workshop. A skin had formed on the surface of a can of linseed oil he left open overnight. That rubbery film was harder than varnish and more flexible than lacquer. Walton realized the oil was reacting with oxygen in the air and forming a natural polymer. He spent the next 3 years perfecting the process in a factory outside London. By 1863, he had invented linoleum, the first mass-produced floor covering in history, built entirely on one ingredient: linseed oil, pressed from the seeds of the flax plant. But the story of this oil goes back much further than Victorian England. 20,000 years further, the flax plant is one of the oldest cultivated crops on Earth, grown in ancient Mesopotamia for both fiber and seed. Egyptian tombs contain linen cloth woven from flax that is still intact after 4,000 years. And in ancient China, woodworkers discovered that pressing those seeds produced a golden oil that soaked into timber and hardened over weeks into a protective shield. This was the first wood finish ever recorded in human history. Not polyurethane from a factory, not chemical sealant from a laboratory. Oil from a seed, pressed by hand, rubbed into wood with a cloth. For centuries across Europe, every cabinet maker, shipbuilder, and furniture craftsman used linseed oil as the foundation of their work. Medieval builders mixed it with metallic compounds to create boiled linseed oil, which dried harder and faster. Cathedral doors in Germany treated with this oil in the 1500s are still standing today. Then something happened that changed everything. In the 1950s, the petrochemical industry introduced synthetic alkyd resins. Polyurethane, lacquer, and chemical varnishes flooded the market. These products were faster to apply, shinier to look at, and far more profitable to manufacture. Linseed oil cost pennies per gallon to produce. Synthetic finishes cost dollars and required reapplication every 2 to 3 years. The industry did not switch because the new products were better. They switched because the new products generated repeat revenue. And the old formula quietly disappeared from hardware store shelves. Now, before I continue, I need to stop and tell you something important. This video is just the tip of what the industry has hidden from you. I spent months collecting everything they buried into one place. Fire techniques that military units used and that are now classified as dangerous, emergency shelters that cost nothing and outperform $200 tents, DIY water filters that engineers tested and could not believe, off-grid energy methods that work without solar panels or batteries. All of it is inside the complete Forbidden Hacks vault. Over 10 guides in one place. No filler, straight to the point. The link is in the description right below this video. But stay right here because the science behind this wood formula is about to change how you see every piece of timber in your home. Here is what happens at the molecular level when you apply this liquid to damaged wood. Linseed oil is a triglyceride with an unusually high concentration of alpha-linolenic acid. That is a polyunsaturated fatty acid that reacts with oxygen through a process called autoxidation. When you rub the oil into wood, it does not sit on the surface like paint or varnish. It penetrates deep into the cellular structure of the timber itself. Once inside, the fatty acid chains begin to cross-link with each other, forming a flexible polymer network that fills every pore. The cross-linking process creates a new material inside the wood fibers, a natural resin that expands and contracts with temperature, repels moisture, and resists scratching. Research confirmed that linseed oil penetrates wood up to 4 times deeper than synthetic polyurethane. Polyurethane sits on top of the grain like a plastic shell, and one crack lets moisture rush underneath. That is why polyurethane decks peel, blister, and turn gray within 3 seasons. Linseed oil does the opposite because it becomes part of the wood itself. Now add white vinegar to the mixture and something remarkable happens. Vinegar is acetic acid, a natural solvent that cuts through decades of grime, oxidation, and dead surface finish without damaging healthy fibers underneath. While the vinegar strips away the gray layer, The linseed oil floods into the freshly exposed grain and begins polymerizing immediately. The third ingredient is the key that unlocks the entire formula. Turpentine, a natural solvent distilled from pine resin, thins the linseed oil so it penetrates twice as deep and cures twice as fast. Without turpentine, the oil pools on the surface and takes weeks to harden. With turpentine, it soaks in within minutes and begins hardening within hours. The total cost of these 3 ingredients at any hardware store is under $2 per application. A quart of boiled linseed oil costs about $4. A gallon of white vinegar costs under $3. And a small can of turpentine runs about $5 and lasts for months. Now compare that to what a contractor charges for the same result. The national average to refinish a 200 square foot deck is $980. Labor alone runs between $600 and $1,500 for a job that takes 1 to 3 days. A single piece of antique furniture costs $300 to $800 at a restoration shop. And what do most professionals use as the chemical foundation of their work? Oil-based products derived from the exact same chemistry that has existed since 1860. The markup is not on skill. The markup is on your ignorance. If you have made it this far, you already know more about wood restoration than 99% of homeowners. Subscribe and share this with someone who is about to waste $1,000 on a contractor. And remember, everything the industry buried is inside the Complete Forbidden Hacks vault. The link is right there in the description. Now stay with me, because what comes next is the part they really do not want you to hear. So why is this formula not sold in every hardware store? Why does every contractor pretend it does not exist? Because the wood restoration industry generates nearly $2 billion per year in product sales alone. The broader home restoration market in the United States exceeded $210 billion in annual revenue. That is the size of the machine that profits from your ignorance of 3 ingredients you can buy for pocket change. Deck refinishing alone costs homeowners an average of $900 to $2,700 per project, and the industry recommends you refinish every 2 to 3 years. Over 20 years of home ownership, that is nearly $7,000 spent on a single wooden platform behind your house. And it all depends on one thing: keeping you convinced that you cannot do this yourself. You cannot patent linseed oil because it is a natural product that has existed for thousands of years. You cannot patent vinegar because it is acetic acid, one of the oldest chemicals known to humanity. You cannot patent turpentine because it has been distilled from pine trees since the ancient Greeks. There is no proprietary molecule, no trade secret, no intellectual property to protect. And what cannot be patented cannot generate licensing fees. The wood restore product market was valued at $1.9 billion in 2024, dominated by corporations like 3M, Sherwin-Williams, and Howard Products. Their message is simple: do not try this at home, buy our brand. But the active ingredient in the majority of oil-based wood restoration products is the same drying oil chemistry Frederick Walton discovered in 1860. They are selling you linseed oil with additives and a logo at 10 to 50 times the raw material cost. That is not innovation. That is a business model built on keeping you away from a chemistry textbook. I need to be honest with you about something, because this formula is not magic, and there are limitations you should understand. Raw linseed oil without metallic drying agents can take weeks to fully cure in humid environments, which is why the recipe specifically calls for boiled linseed oil that contains drying catalysts to accelerate hardening to 24 to 48 hours. Linseed oil can also yellow slightly over time, especially on very light woods like maple or birch. On darker woods like oak, walnut, cedar, and redwood, the warming tone actually enhances the grain beautifully. And one critical safety warning that most DIY channels completely ignore: rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust if left crumpled in a pile. In 1991, a fire caused by linseed oil-soaked rags destroyed one Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia and killed 3 firefighters. Always spread your rags flat to dry outdoors, or submerge them in water in a sealed metal container before disposal. This is not optional. This is a life safety rule. Here is exactly how to make and apply this liquid. Step 1. Gather 3 ingredients from any hardware store. 1 part boiled linseed oil, the can must say boiled on the label. 1 part white distilled vinegar. 1 part turpentine, also called gum spirits, found in the paint aisle. Step 2. Combine equal parts of all 3 into a glass jar with a tight lid and shake for 30 seconds until the mixture emulsifies into a cloudy golden liquid. Step 3. Clean the wood surface with a dry brush to remove loose dirt and debris. You do not need to sand, strip, or power wash. Step 4. Dip a clean cotton rag into the mixture and apply it along the grain using firm, even strokes, working in sections about 2 feet wide. Step 5. Let the first coat absorb for 10 to 15 minutes, then wipe away any excess with a dry cloth. Step 6. Wait 24 hours and apply a second coat. The second coat deepens the color and doubles the protective barrier inside the wood fibers. For a weathered deck, start with the most damaged board, The gray, oxidized layer dissolves on contact with the vinegar, and the golden oil floods into the exposed grain within seconds. The before and after on a single board will convince you faster than anything I can say. For indoor furniture, apply with a softer cloth in small circular motions. Antique pieces respond especially well because the oil rehydrates wood that has been drying out for decades. For fences, use a wider brush or paint roller. One batch in a quart jar covers 30 to 40 square feet. A contractor would charge you $600 or more for that same area. A floor refinishing company would quote $3 to $7 per square foot, turning a 200 square foot room into a $1,400 invoice. You just did it for less than $2 in 20 minutes. No appointment, no wait, no strangers in your house, and the finish lasts because linseed oil does not sit on the surface waiting to chip. It lives inside the wood and renews with each reapplication. One maintenance coat per year keeps the grain protected for decades. This knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked so well that an entire industry had to pretend it never existed. For 20,000 years, humans protected wood with oil from a seed and acid from fermented grain. No corporation, no brand name, no expensive equipment. Just chemistry that nature perfected long before any patent office opened its doors. Your grandparents knew this formula. It was written on index cards tucked inside kitchen drawers, mixed in glass jars and garages across every small town in America. Then, one generation stopped passing it down because a television commercial told them there was a better way. There was not a better way. There was just a more expensive way. The contractors know this formula. The manufacturers definitely know it. The $2 billion wood restoration industry prays every single day that you never learn what you just learned in this video. But now you know. And the formula is not complicated enough to forget. 3 ingredients, equal parts, 1 jar, 1 rag, 20 minutes. That gray deck you have been avoiding all summer could look brand new by this weekend. That fence your neighbor keeps suggesting you replace could be restored before dinner tonight. That antique table that looks tired and worn could shine again, all for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. The wood did not die. It was waiting for someone to remember what the industry made us forget. If this vault made a difference for you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs it. Every share preserves what the industry tried to erase. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside is even heavier than what you heard today.